Content warning. This video discusses suicide as well as other sensitive topics of this nature. If this is something you are unable to handle, I would suggest clicking off of this video. When was the first time you were impacted by a story in manga? The first line, panel, or drawing that has remained in the depths of your memory from childhood. Maybe it made you laugh, made you cry, or gave you a new perspective that changed your way of thinking. Did you realize that an artist hundreds of miles away was able to connect you through a single page for years to come? A person you may never meet or know, always being a piece of the puzzle that makes you. For myself, that first time was when I read a manga called Sand Chronicles by Hinako Ashihara, a dramatic story that follows the life of a girl named An as she struggles with the suicide of her mother. We see An through all the changes in her life, from puberty, transferring schools, falling in love, breakups, first times, and grief. The grains of sand falling through An's hourglass shows us that there is no deadline for accepting the traumas faced in your life. Sand Chronicles is a manga that I have always remembered and continually come back to. As a depressed, lonely kid in high school, it gave me solace during my formative years. I was seeing another character who was having similar feelings of ineptitude and confusion like myself. An made poor decisions based on strong feelings that welled up inside, which made me feel seen. I was deeply intertwined with this series that Ashihara laid out as if it were directly addressing me. On January 29th of this year, I woke up to the news of Hinako Ashihara's death, which has since been ruled suicide. She had just turned 50 a few days prior. I remember having to take a moment to process this information before finally letting it sink in. This author, whose stories resonated with me on such a personal level, was no longer here. One who was able to write complex dramas about the flawed nature of humans, which were ultimately filled with the joys of life. Yet, she was struggling herself. I am in no way interested in recounting the drama that occurred before Ashihara's death in this video. For months on Twitter, I felt the debate around it has taken away from the tragedy of losing such a wonderful and talented artist. This video is meant to honor her legacy and showcase what an incredible writer Ashihara was. If you'd like to read up on the events that happened before the tragedy, a link will be left in the description. Many people who read shoujo beat manga during the late 2000s were probably familiar with Sand Chronicles or Ashihara. Sand Chronicles was a popular series for shoujo beat, even being showcased in the magazine with interviews from Ashihara herself. Which means her work didn't just resonate with me, it resonated with so many different people who read it. In an old interview with Shoujo Beat, the editor of Sand Chronicles mentioned their surprise at the series being so well received in the States. They thought it was a uniquely Japanese manga that may not make sense to a reader outside of Japan, but the human emotions that Ashihara is able to convey in her manga is what makes it so universal. Her talent for writing such vivid characters that feel as though they could step right off the page is how she was able to tie us all together, no matter where you lived. This year in October would have marked Ashihara's 30th anniversary of her debut as a manga artist. Her first work to make it in a magazine was a one-shot with a title that roughly translates to "This Conversation is Over." It had won a Shogakukan Newcomer Comic Award and was able to be published in Betsukomi, where the majority of her manga could be found after. Most of Ashihara's early work consists of short stories that were later compiled together, all of which had very similar themes to her more recent works, although maturing over time. Stories of broken teens who, while standing on their last leg, find a ray of hope and learn to love again. Ones of resilience after causing mistakes, learning to forgive yourself or others, each laying bare the muddy emotions we all have through the character drawn. What an especially common theme, though, is her focus on death. These one-shots early on in her career are centered on the idea of dying or the loss of another that shakes a character to their core. A one-shot titled Pinky Promise from 2002 starts with a teen girl watching a news report, where they announce 2 girls have died after jumping off a building. Pinky Promise then posits these questions. Should one value their life? What does it mean to value your life when it feels like no one else values you? Would anyone even notice you if you were gone? Questions like these are extremely difficult, if not impossible to answer, but Ashihara tackles them head on. She attempts to answer them with full honesty while still keeping that light at the end of the tunnel shining. For Pinky Promise, her answer to the question is that it's completely normal to feel this way when you're lonely or when you've lost someone important to you. The thought of death itself isn't something you need to shy away from. She shows that it's a requirement to find a reason to keep moving forward, whether it's friendship, love, or just a meal with another. These same questions arise in Sand Chronicles as well. As the main character An has lost her mother to suicide, she finds her own mental well-being is becoming more unstable, hanging on to the hope of a one true love who can make her forget the murky thoughts swirling inside. The question of whether An's life has meaning without her mother in it is answered in a similar way as Pinky Promise. Our lives have meaning because the simple acts of kindness by all people around us give it meaning. After attempting to follow her mother's shadow, An remembers all of the people who support her, whether it's her stepmom simply asking about her health, her stepsister offering her the few possessions she owns, or the family she met on the train only hours earlier giving her a place to stay. All of these little things are what An, and by proxy Ashihara, thinks give our lives value. They are what give us hope. It doesn't just have to be a soulmate who gives us strength, but the accumulation of all these interactions. While Ashihara portrays the inevitable difficulties everyone must face, it is never without a glimmer of hope. Hope that one day we can see a brighter future for ourselves. Her stories don't often end with happily ever afters either. The main conflict may be resolved, but the character has only just started their journey to whatever recovery they're on, even if that path they walk to the future may be rocky along the way. There's no finality to trauma. It's just something we learn to accept and deal with over time. Ashihara examines the idea that time may not actually heal wounds. Rather, the wound may just become normal to live with. The manga Ashihara was working on before her untimely passing is exactly the kind of hopeful world she always wrote about. It was a series called Sexy Tanaka-san, with a premise that, at first glance, seems so different from all of her previous works. However, it depicts the same things Ashihara has become known for, with emphasis on the human drama elements of life. Sexy Tanaka-san follows two older women who befriend one another and learn to gain confidence in themselves through belly dancing. None of the characters have any particularly deep or dramatic trauma that Ashihara would write in her previous works, but they all have their own daily struggles that makes life difficult to deal with. They feel the weight of their own loneliness and are constantly fighting their lack of self-confidence. Tanaka, who is a woman in her 40s, was someone who always felt like she was less than. Her looks made her feel ashamed, and she recoils into her cocoon through life. That is until she decides to change, finding belly dancing in the process. She's found that this is the one thing that can make her feel confident and brave. Whether she messes up on stage doesn't matter as long as she is able to put one foot in front of the other. Of course, it isn't a perfect fix. She continues to struggle with her insecurities, but she comes to feel more neutral about them instead of letting them drag her entire life down. When I look through old posts from Ashihara, you can tell that she lacked confidence in herself too. Though she won the 50th Shogakukan Manga Award, she started her thank you by saying she didn't feel worthy. She has talked about how she felt like she was no good at drawing, and that she can't even look back on her works with how poorly she feels she did. In a way, it seems like Tanaka is the character that she was aspiring to be. Someone who can take all those insecurities and flaunt them on stage for all to see. It's hard to look back at many of Ashihara's manga, though. Knowing what we know now, it's so easy to draw comparisons between her themes and her own state of being. I ask myself how much of what she wrote was just her way of grappling with her own feelings of inadequacy or loneliness, trying to convince herself that there is always hope or always a reason to move on. The thought of that makes the gravity of her series weigh on me even more. Being a mangaka is already an extremely isolating job. You work constant long hours with continual aches and pains. Many mangaka work themselves until they break. It could be physically or mentally. It's just a matter of which happens first. It's an unfortunate side effect of the ever-moving manga-making machine. Monthly deadlines on 100-page manuscripts with who knows how many edits per page could wear anyone down. After her loss, I've been reading as much of her work as I possibly can, and each one makes me feel the hole that she has left behind. Obviously, Sand Chronicles was her manga that left a lasting impression on me, but her works continue to resonate. Every new one I find, whether a 40-page short story or a brand new title, makes me feel like Ashihara had some sort of access to the meaning of human existence. There's something about each story she makes that taps into my empathy and tells me this is what it means to live. To live is to make mistakes. It's to continue to make mistakes. Bad decisions are always going to plague you through life. However, they do not define you. What defines you is how you continue to live after the fact. If you hurt someone, if you get hurt, this doesn't make you worthless. There's always a reason to continue on, and there's always a reason to find meaning in yourself. This is what Hinako Ashihara has been showing me throughout her 30-year career. The weight of her loss is just as heavy as the hope she's left. Before deciding to make this video, I read one more one-shot from Ashihara that got published in English back in 2005. A short story called That Sweet Organ Song. It's set in 1995, right after the Great Hanshin earthquake had devastated Japan, where a young girl finds a lone organ remaining in the rubble. We see the flashback to the history of this organ, how the person who once played it in the 1920s longed to be a pianist and composer whose songs were played across the world long after he died. Unfortunately, he passes before being able to do so, with only his lover to remember him by. Even if that dull pain the lover feels for years to come still resides in her, Ashihara reminds us there's a glimmer of hope. That young girl who found the organ standing tall amongst the wreckage finds the sheet music as well, playing the song the pianist composed all those years ago as a symbol of hope. He wanted to share the song with future generations for years and years as any artist desires, no matter if it's months or decades after the fact. I have no doubt that the legacy of Hinako Ashihara will be the same.